Zira had always been loyal to her masters. She had been raised in the Arcanian Empire, a powerful force that ruled over many planets. From the moment she was born, she was trained to serve, to follow orders, and to never question the Empire. For Zira, duty was everything. She never thought about what her life could be beyond serving her masters. The Arcanian Empire was a strict and unforgiving system, but Zira accepted it. She was a servant, and that was her place. She had no other purpose. Her days were spent working in the palace, cleaning, cooking, and taking care of her master's needs. The world outside the palace walls seemed distant and unimportant to her. She knew that to serve the Empire was the highest honor she could ever have. But everything changed when they brought in a human. Zira had seen humans before prisoners, captured in wars with the Empire, but this one was different. He was not like the others. His name was Jason, and he was a prisoner of war. Zira had been ordered to care for him while he was kept in the palace. Jason had been badly injured, and his face was bruised and swollen from the torture he had endured. When Zira first saw him, she felt nothing. She had been trained not to care about the pain of others. But as she tended to his wounds, something inside her started to change. Jason never complained. He simply looked at her with calm eyes, as if he knew he would survive this. His silence was strange. He didn't beg for mercy like the others did. He didn't show fear. Zira didn't understand it. She had been told that humans were weak. They were nothing but animals to the Empire, and they should be treated as such. But Jason was not like the humans she had been taught about. There was something about him that made Zira question everything she had been taught. Over the next few days, Zira found herself spending more time with him. She cleaned his wounds, brought him food, tried to make him as comfortable as she could. Even though she knew he would never be allowed to leave the palace, Jason was always calm. He never yelled or cursed his captors. Instead, he spoke softly. To Zira, when she came to check on him, he talked about his home, Earth, and the rebellion that had been fighting against the Empire. He spoke of hope and freedom, things Zira had never known. She listened to him, intrigued by his words. She had never heard anyone speak like this before. "You're not like the others," Zira said one evening as she cleaned his wounds. "The other humans beg and cry for mercy, but you're different." Jason looked up at her, his eyes filled with a quiet strength. "I don't beg for mercy, Zira, not from anyone, especially not from people who think they have power over me." Zira didn't know how to respond to that. She had always done what was expected of her. She had never questioned her place in the world. Something about Jason's words made her think, is there more to life than just serving her masters? Was there something else she was supposed to be doing? The days passed, and Zira's thoughts became more troubled. She began to think about the stories Jason had told her. He spoke of a world where people were free, where they could live without fear, where they didn't have to serve anyone. Zira had never known that kind of world. She had been raised to believe that loyalty to the Empire was the only way to live. But now, she wasn't so sure. One night, Zira went to the palace gardens to get some fresh air. As she walked among the flowers, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was changing inside her. She had always thought that being loyal to her masters was the right thing to do. But now, she wasn't so certain. Could there be another way? Could there be a different life for her? She thought about Jason again. He was a prisoner, but he had something she didn't have: freedom. He had a belief in something bigger than himself. He had hope, something she had never allowed herself to feel. "Why do you stay so calm?" Zira had asked him one day. "Because I know I'm not alone," Jason had replied. "There are others out there, fighting for freedom, and I'm part of that fight. Even if I'm locked in here, I can't give up on it. Not now." Zira had never understood what Jason meant by that. But now, as she walked alone in the garden, she started to think that maybe she didn't need to understand all of it. Maybe she just needed to believe in something for the first time in her life. As the sun began to set, Zira made a decision. She didn't know what it would mean for her future, but she knew she couldn't keep living the way she had been. She wasn't just a servant. She was more than that. Maybe, just maybe, there was something she could do to make a difference. Sound of footsteps behind her broke her thoughts. She turned to see one of her masters approaching, a stern look on his face. She quickly straightened up, but for the first time, she didn't feel afraid. "Zira," he said, his voice cold. "You're needed inside." Zira nodded and turned to follow him, but as she walked back to the palace, her heart felt lighter than it ever had before. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in her life, she felt ready to face it. The next few days were different for Zira. She had always been a loyal servant to her masters, following their every command without question. But now she couldn't help but think about everything Jason had said. His words had started to change something inside her. He had talked about freedom, about hope, and about a world beyond the Empire's control. Zira had never allowed herself to think about those things before, but now she couldn't stop thinking about them. Every time she visited Jason, she found herself drawn to his calm and steady presence. Despite being a prisoner, he showed no fear. He spoke with a kind of peace that Zira couldn't understand. Jason treated her with respect, something she wasn't used to. To him, she wasn't just a servant, she was a person. And that made Zira question everything she had ever known. One afternoon, while she was cleaning his wounds again, Jason looked at her and smiled. "You know, Zira, I can see it in your eyes," he said softly. "You're not like them. You don't have to keep following orders if they don't feel right." Zira looked at him, surprised. "What do you mean? I have no choice. I was born to serve. I don't know anything else." Jason shook his head. "That's the thing, Zira. You've been taught to believe that. But the truth is, you have a choice. Everyone has a choice, even you." Zira felt a strange flutter in her chest. Could it be true? Could she really choose something different? She had always thought that her life was set in stone, that she was nothing more than a servant to the Empire. But the more she heard Jason speak, the more she began to wonder if there was another way to live. A way where she could be free. That night, as Zira lay in her quarters, she stared up at the ceiling, lost in thought. She had been told all her life that loyalty to the Empire was the most important thing. It was the foundation of her existence. But now, she was beginning to question that belief. What if the Empire wasn't as noble as they made it seem? What if their rule was built on lies and cruelty? Zira couldn't ignore the growing unease in her heart. She had seen the way the Empire treated its prisoners, especially the humans. They were treated like animals, their lives worth nothing. Jason had told her stories of his world, of how humans fought for their freedom, how they believed in equality and justice. It sounded so different from the world Zira knew, a world where only the strong survived, and everyone else was beneath them. The more Zira thought about it, the more she realized that she didn't want to be a part of that system anymore. She didn't want to serve a cause that hurt so many people. She didn't want to be a tool for the Empire's cruelty. But how could she break free from the life she had always known? The next morning, as Zira entered the palace courtyard to prepare for the day's duties, she noticed something that made her heart skip a beat. There, standing at the edge of the courtyard, was Jason. He was surrounded by guards. But there was something different in the way he stood. He wasn't broken. He wasn't afraid. It was as if he had been waiting for this moment all along. Zira quickly walked over to him, trying not to draw attention to herself. She could feel her heart racing in her chest. "Jason," she whispered, her voice trembling. "What's happening? What are they going to do to you?" Jason smiled at her, his eyes filled with calm determination. "They're going to take me to the dungeon. But I'm not afraid, Zira. I've already made my peace. I've been a prisoner for so long, but that doesn't mean I'm weak. I won't let them break me." Zira felt a surge of anger rise within her. How could they treat him like this? How could they treat anyone like this? She had always accepted the way things were, but now she couldn't ignore the injustice any longer. Jason had given her a glimpse of something she hadn't even known existed, a world where people were free to choose their own path. A world where kindness and respect were the foundation of society. As the guards dragged Jason away, Zira stood, frozen, her mind racing. She had always followed orders, always kept her head down and stayed out of trouble. But now she felt something inside her stirring, something that told her she couldn't just stand by and watch anymore. Zira looked around, making sure no one was watching, and then made her decision. She couldn't let this go on. She couldn't. Let Jason be taken to the dungeon without doing something, without another thought. Zira slipped into the shadows and followed the guards as they led Jason away. She knew the consequences of defying the Empire, but for the first time in her life, she did. And care, she wasn't just a servant anymore. She was a person with the power to make a difference. As she approached the guards, Zira's heart pounded in her chest. She couldn't believe she was doing this. She had always been afraid of the consequences. But now, that fear seemed so small compared to the anger burning inside her. Jason had shown her a different way, a way that didn't involve submission and fear. Wasn't just a servant anymore. She was something more. Zira didn't know what would happen next. But she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't going to stand by and let the Empire take away her humanity. Not anymore. Zira's heart raced as she followed the guards through the palace halls. Every step felt heavier than the last, and the fear that had once ruled her life began to fade, replaced by a strong new feeling. It wasn't fear, it was anger. Anger at the system she had served her whole life. Anger at the way her masters treated people like Jason. She couldn't stay silent anymore. She couldn't just follow orders and pretend it was all okay. Jason walked ahead of her, his hands bound by chains, but his posture was strong. He wasn't broken, even in this moment. That made Zira admire him even more. She had always been taught that strength came from obedience. But Jason showed her that real strength came from standing up for what was right, even when everything seemed impossible. The guards didn't notice Zira following them. They were too focused on Jason, who had become their prisoner once again. But Zira couldn't just watch him be dragged away. She knew that what they planned to do next wasn't just punishment, it was a message. A message to anyone who thought about defying the Empire. She had to act quickly. Zira's plan was risky, but she couldn't let fear stop her now. She reached out, touching the sleeve of one of the guards. He turned around, his expression cold. Zira's heart skipped a beat, but she forced herself to speak. "Please," she whispered. "He hasn't done anything wrong. Let him go. I can take him back to his cell." The guard eyed her with suspicion. He'd never seen her act like this before. Zira had always been quiet and obedient. She had never spoken up for anyone. "He's a prisoner," Zira the guard said, his voice low. "You don't tell us what to do?" "I know," Zira said quickly. "But I think he can help us. He's different. Please, just let him go." The guard shook his head. "You're asking for trouble, Zira. Stay out of this." But Zira didn't move. She didn't care anymore. She couldn't back down. She had seen the truth now, and it had changed her. "Just listen to me," she said. "If you let him go, I'll take full responsibility. The Empire won't punish you. I'll make sure of it. Please, just trust me." The guard stared at her for a long moment, then turned to look at the other guards. They exchanged a few quiet words, but Zira didn't hear them. All she could hear was the sound of her own heartbeat in her ears. Was this really happening? Was she really going to do this? The guard finally sighed, lowering his weapon. "Fine," he said reluctantly. "But this better not come back to haunt us." Zira didn't hesitate. She stepped forward, untied Jason's chains, and helped him stand up. The moment his chains were gone, he turned to her with a look of disbelief. You actually did it," Jason said, his voice full of wonder. "I thought for sure they'd take me to the dungeon." Zira shook her head, her eyes filled with determination. "Not anymore. Not just a servant anymore. I'm a person. I can make my own choices." Jason's eyes softened, and for a moment, Zira saw something in him, something that went beyond gratitude. It was hope. Hope for something greater than this life, something she had never allowed herself to believe in before. "Where do we go now?" Zira asked, her voice quiet but full of purpose. "We need to get out of the palace," Jason said. "We need to find the others. The resistance. There's a network of us. People who want to see the Empire fall." Zira didn't need to ask any more questions. She knew what she had to do. She had to help him. She had to help them all. They moved quickly, slipping through the halls of the palace, avoiding the guards as best as they could. Zira's mind was racing. What had she just done? She had just defied her masters. She had just broken every rule she had lived by, but in her heart, she knew it was the right thing to do. She couldn't stay in a world that hurt people like Jason anymore. She had to fight for something better. The outside world was different from the inside of the palace. The air felt fresher, and the streets seemed quieter, as if the world was waiting for something to happen. Zira felt a strange sense of freedom as they moved through the city. For the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid of the consequences. She wasn't afraid of what might happen next. Jason led the way, his eyes scanning the streets for any signs of danger. Zira stayed close behind him, keeping a watchful eye out. They had to be careful. Empire had spies everywhere, and they would be looking for Jason. They couldn't afford to get caught now. Finally, they reached a small alley, where a hidden door led to an underground passage. Jason knocked 3 times, and after a few moments the door creaked open. A woman stepped out, her face stern but welcoming. "You made it," she said, her voice low. "I was starting to think the Empire had caught you. We were close," Jason said, smiling at her. "But we made it." Zira stood back, unsure of what to do next. She had never been in a place like this before. She had never been a part of a rebellion. Never thought she would be in a situation like this. But now, here she was, standing in the shadows of the Empire, ready to do whatever it took to help. "You're safe now," the woman said, looking at Zira. "We've got a place for you, too. If you want to fight for a better future, you'll find it here." Zira took a deep breath. She had made her choice. She wasn't a servant anymore. She wasn't just following orders. She was fighting for something she believed in, and she was going to do everything she could to help the resistance. Bring down the Empire. The underground hideout was unlike anything Zira had ever seen. The walls were made of rough stone, the ceiling low, and the air smelled faintly of dampness and old wood. But despite the humble surroundings, there was a sense of purpose in the air. It was a place where people came together not to serve, but to fight for something greater. Zira felt it immediately. She was no longer just a servant. She was part of something important, something that mattered. Jason led her deeper into the hideout. The walls were lined with maps and papers, and people were moving quickly, talking in low voices. There was a sense of urgency in the air. The rebellion was preparing for something big. Zira was going to be a part of it. They reached a small room where a few people were gathered around a table. One of them, a tall woman with short dark hair, looked up as they entered. She nodded at Jason, then turned to Zira, her eyes sharp but kind. "You made it," the woman said, her voice calm but firm. "I'm Lena. We've been expecting you." Zira nodded, unsure of what to say. She had never been in a room like this before. Like Lena and Jason, they were fighters, rebels. Zira had spent her whole life serving those in power, never once thinking that she could be part of something different. But now, as she stood in this room, she realized just how much she had changed in such a short time. Jason spoke first. "Zira helped me escape. She's ready to join the fight." Lena's eyes softened, and she gave Zira a reassuring smile. "We can always use more people who are willing to stand up. It won't be easy. This isn't some simple mission. The Empire is everywhere, and they'll do whatever it takes to stop us." Zira didn't hesitate. "I understand. I'm ready." Lena looked at her for a moment, then nodded. "All right. We need to make sure you're prepared. There's no turning back from here. Once you're in, you'll be expected to fight like the rest of us." Zira didn't flinch. She had already made up her mind. She had spent so many years obeying orders. Now she was ready to give orders. She was ready to fight. Lena handed Zira a small, worn-out bag. "This will have everything you need. Get some rest for now. Tomorrow, we'll start your training." Zira took the bag and thanked her, then followed Lena out of the room. She had never been trained for anything like this. She had always been taught to serve, to obey, to remain silent. But now, as she thought about the mission ahead, she felt a new kind of strength. She wasn't just following orders anymore. She was choosing her own path. And that felt like freedom. The next morning, Zira woke early, just as the first light of dawn began to filter through the small windows of the hideout. She could hear people moving around, preparing for the day. Jason was already up, talking quietly with some of the others. Zira stood up, stretched, and gathered her things. Lena came over to her with a serious expression. "Today, we're going to teach you how to move like us. We need you to be quick, quiet, and prepared for anything. The Empire has eyes everywhere, and we can't afford to be caught." Zira nodded. She had always been careful, always followed the rules, but now she had to learn to think differently. She had to learn how to be a rebel. The training was hard. It wasn't just about fighting or using weapons, it was about being aware of everything around her. Lena taught Zira how to move silently, how to blend into the shadows, and how to keep her emotions in check. The first few hours were difficult. Zira was used to being cautious and obedient, but now she had to be quick and sharp. Thinking on her feet, Jason worked with her as well, showed her how to use a small knife. How? Zira's hands were sore by the end of the day. But there was a fire inside her, now a fire that pushed her to keep going, even when she was exhausted. She wasn't just doing this for herself, she was doing it for everyone who had ever suffered under the Empire's rule. As the sun set, Zira sat down on the cold stone floor, trying to catch her breath. Jason sat next to her, wiping the sweat from his forehead. "You're doing great," he said, his voice calm. "I know it's a lot to take in, but you're getting the hang of it." Zira smiled, feeling a sense of pride in herself that she had never felt before. "I didn't think I could do it. I never imagined I would be here learning how to fight." Jason gave her a warm look. "We'll have to start somewhere. But I see something in you, Zira. You've got more strength in you than you know." Zira felt a rush of emotion as she looked at him. For so long, she had felt like nothing more than a tool to be used. But now, Jason was showing her that she was so much more than that. A person with a purpose, and her purpose wasn't to serve the Empire, it was to fight for freedom. The next few days were filled with more training. But Zira was determined. She learned how to use new weapons, how to plan and execute a mission, and how to be a part of something bigger than herself. Every moment felt like a new beginning, and with each lesson, Zira became more confident in her decision to join the rebellion. As the days passed, Zira knew that there was no turning back. She had made a choice, and she was ready to face whatever came next. The Empire had taken so much from her, from everyone. Every morning, she woke early, determined to be better than the day before. She had learned to move silently, to blend into the shadows, and to fight. But the hardest part was learning how to think like a rebel. Zira had spent her life obeying orders, but now she had to become the one giving orders, making decisions that could change the course of the fight against the Empire. Jason was always by her side, helping her adjust to the new way of thinking. They spent hours talking about strategy, about the Empire's weaknesses, and about the ways they could strike back. Jason's experience was invaluable, but Zira had something he didn't: an understanding of the Empire from the inside. Knew how they thought, how they operated, and how to exploit their weaknesses. She could use that knowledge to help the rebellion. One evening, after a long day of training, Zira and Jason sat on the edge of the hideout, watching the stars. Zira had never paid much attention to the stars before. She had always been too focused on her duties. But now, as she stared up at the sky, she felt something stir inside her, a sense of possibility. She had never allowed herself to dream before, but now the future seemed wide open. The world felt different, and she wasn't just a servant anymore. She was part of something that could change everything. "We've got a mission coming up," Jason said, breaking the silence. His voice was serious, but there was a hint of excitement in it. "The Empire is moving a fleet to a new location, and we've got a chance to strike before they can fully set up. If we hit them now, we can disrupt their plans." Zira turned. She had spent so long preparing for this moment, and now it was finally here. They were going to take the fight to the Empire. They were going to do something that would make the Empire feel the weight of their rebellion. "Do you think we're ready?" Zira asked. Her voice was steady, but she could feel the tension in her chest. She knew that this mission could be dangerous, but she also knew that they couldn't back down now. Jason looked at her, his eyes full of confidence. "We are ready. You're ready. We've trained for this. Empire has no idea what's coming." Zira took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision on her shoulders. She had always followed orders, always done what was expected of her. But now, she was making her own decisions. She was no longer a servant. She was a warrior, and she was ready to fight for freedom. The next day, they set out early, making their way through the city streets to meet with the rest of the rebellion. Zira could feel the tension in the air. The mission was risky, but everyone knew what was. At stake, they couldn't afford to fail. As they gathered in a small, hidden room, Lena briefed them on the details of the mission. Zira listened carefully, taking in every word. The plan was simple, but dangerous. An escape before the Empire could respond. It was a long shot, but if it worked, it would be a major blow to the Empire's power. "This is the moment we've all been waiting for," Lena said, her voice firm and determined. "We hit them hard, and we make sure they know that the rebellion isn't just a group of people hiding in the shadows. We are a force they can't ignore." Zira felt a surge of energy. This was the moment when everything would change. She wasn't just a servant anymore. She was a part of something that could change the galaxy. She was going to fight for a future where people were free, where no one had to live in fear of the Empire. The team set out under the cover of darkness, moving quickly and silently. Zira's heart raced as they approached the Empire's fleet. She could see the large ships in the distance, their dark silhouettes looming in the night sky. It was a powerful sight, but Zira didn't feel afraid. She felt alive. She was no longer a servant to the Empire. She was a warrior, fighting for something greater than herself. As they infiltrated the fleet, Zira moved with precision. She had learned how to be quick and silent, and now those skills were put to the test. They worked together, cutting through the Empire's defenses like a knife through butter. Zira's mind was sharp, her every move calculated. She was focused, determined, and ready to do whatever it took to make the Empire feel the consequences of their actions. Finally, they reached the communication center. Zira placed the device that would disable the Empire's systems, her hands steady, even though her heart was pounding in her chest. She knew that this was the key to the mission's success. If they could disrupt the Empire's communications, they would buy themselves enough time to escape. With a final glance at the device, Zira turned to Jason. "It's done," she said quietly. Jason nodded, his face grim. "Now, we get out of here," but as they turned to leave, alarms began to blare. The Empire had detected their presence. Zira's heart sank, but she didn't panic. This was what they had prepared for. They had to move fast. The team ran through the halls, dodging guards and taking out anyone who stood in their way. Zira's training kicked in, and she moved like a shadow, silent and swift. She could hear the sounds of the Empire closing in, but she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. Finally, they reached the escape point. Zira's breath was heavy, her muscles aching, but she didn't slow down. The mission had been a success. They had struck a blow to the Empire, and now they had to get out. As they escaped into the night, Zira felt a sense of triumph. They had done it. They had taken the fight to the Empire, and they had won. But this was just the beginning. The rebellion had many more battles to fight, and Zira was ready for every one of them. She wasn't just a servant anymore. She was a fighter. And she would keep fighting until the Empire was no more. The days after the successful mission were filled with a mix of excitement and uncertainty. And the message they sent was clear. The rebellion was strong, and it was not going to back down. Zira couldn't help but feel proud. She had been part of something bigger than herself, something that could change the fate of the galaxy. She felt like she was truly making a difference. But as the celebrations died down, the reality of the rebellion's situation set in. The Empire was vast, and their resources were nearly endless. The rebellion had taken a small victory, but the Empire would not rest. They would come for them, and Zira knew that they had to be ready for whatever came next. Lena gathered the team in a small room deep inside their hideout. The air was thick with tension. Everyone knew that they had to keep moving, keep striking at the heart of the Empire. But they also knew that every action came with a price. The Empire would retaliate, and they had to be prepared. "We've made a mark," Lena said, her voice firm. "But this is only the beginning. We've shown the Empire that we're capable of more than they think. But we've also put a target on our backs. We need to keep moving, stay one step ahead. Our next move needs to be bigger." Zira felt a chill run down her spine. She had been a servant for so long that she had never imagined what it would be like to truly fight a war. The Empire was powerful, and they would not give up easily. But she couldn't let fear stop her. They had to keep fighting. They had to keep pushing forward, no matter the cost. Jason, who had been quiet until now, stood up. His face was serious, his eyes burning with determination. "We need to find the heart of the Empire's operations. If we can SDR, Ike at their main base, we can cripple them. We can't keep fighting them in small skirmishes. We need to take them down once and for all." Zero listened intently. The idea of attacking the Empire's main base was terrifying, but it also made sense. If they could destroy the heart of the Empire's power, it would weaken them, give the rebellion a chance to grow. It was a risky plan. They would be going up against the full might of the Empire, and there was no guarantee they would survive. "We'll need help," Lena said. "We need to contact our allies, gather more forces. We can't wait too long. If the Empire knows what we're planning, they'll stop us before we can act." Zira looked at Jason. He had been the one to show her a different way of life. He had opened her eyes to the possibility of freedom, and now she was ready to help him in whatever way she could. This wasn't just about fighting for herself anymore. It was about fighting for everyone who had suffered under the Empire's rule. Jason turned to her. "Are you ready, Zira? This isn't going to be easy. But I know you've got what it takes." Zira took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision. She wasn't the same person who had served the Empire. She had changed, and she knew that the rebellion was the only path forward. She was no longer just a servant. She was a fighter, and she was ready to do whatever it took to win. "I'm ready," she said, her voice steady. "Let's bring them down." The next few days were a blur of planning and preparation. The team worked around the clock, contacting their allies, gathering information, and getting ready for the attack on the Empire's main base. Zira's mind raced with thoughts of what was to come. She had never imagined that she would be part of something like this, an attack on the heart of the Empire. But now she couldn't imagine doing anything else. As the day of the mission approached, Zira felt a mix of excitement and fear. The Empire's base was heavily guarded and the risk of failure was high. But the rebellion had come this far, and Zira wasn't about to back down now. She had made her choice, and she would fight to the end. The night before the mission, Zira found herself alone in a quiet corner of the hideout. She had always been someone who followed orders, someone who lived her life in the shadows. But now she was no longer in the shadows. She was in the fight, and she would not stop until the Empire was defeated. Jason found her there, sitting by herself. He sat down next to her, his expression calm but serious. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. Zira looked at him, her eyes filled with determination. "I'm ready. We've come this far. I can't stop now." Jason smiled, his eyes warm. "I'm proud of you, Zira. You've come a long way. You've all come a long way. Tomorrow, we'll make sure the Empire knows that we're not going to stop." Zira nodded, feeling a sense of peace settle over her. She wasn't alone in this fight. She had Jason, Lena, and the rest of the rebellion with her. Together, they could do something that had never been done before. They could bring down the Empire. The next morning, the team set out for the Empire's main base. Zira's heart pounded in her chest, but she didn't let fear control her. She had trained for this moment, and she was ready. The mission was dangerous, but it was also the only way forward. They couldn't keep hiding in the shadows. It was time to strike. As they made their way to the Empire's base, Zira felt a surge of purpose. This was why she had joined the rebellion. This was the fight that would change everything. The Empire had taken so much from her, from everyone. But now, she was ready to take it all back. They were about to make history. The final mission had begun. Zira stood in the shadows, watching. as the team moved with precision through the Empire's heavily guarded base. The plan was simple: infiltrate, destroy the Empire's main communication systems, and escape. But it wasn't easy. Every step they took brought them closer to the heart of the Empire, where the real danger awaited. Zira's heart raced, but she pushed the fear aside. She had trained for this moment, and now was the time to prove that she was no longer the servant who obeyed without question. She was a fighter, standing side by side with Jason and the rest of the rebellion. They were united in their cause, ready to take down the Empire once and for all. Jason moved ahead, his eyes scanning the surroundings. Zira stayed close behind, her footsteps silent on the cold metal floor. They had made it this far, but the hardest part was still ahead. The Empire's base was massive, and the security was tight, but they had a secret weapon: Zira's knowledge of the Empire. She knew how to get past the guards, where the weak spots were, and how to avoid detection. That knowledge, combined with Jason's leadership and the rebellion's teamwork, gave them the edge they needed. As they reached the communication center, Zira's breath caught in her throat. This was it, the heart of the Empire's power. If they could destroy this, they could bring down their entire network. The rebellion would finally have a chance to strike back. Jason turned to her. "You ready?" he asked, his voice low and steady. Zira nodded, her mind focused. "I'm ready. Let's finish this." They moved quickly, planting explosives around the room. Zira kept watch, making sure no one was coming. Her eyes darted to every corner of the room, every hallway. She was alert, every sense heightened. The Empire soldiers were out there and they couldn't afford to be caught, but Zira wasn't afraid anymore. She had faced fear before and she had conquered it. Now, she was fighting for a future where no one would have to live in fear. Again, as the countdown began, Zira turned to Jason. "It's done. We need to leave now." Jason nodded, his face grim. "Let's go." They moved swiftly through the base, retracing their steps. But as they reached the exit, they heard the sound of footsteps loud and fast. The Empire had detected their presence. The alarms blared and Zira's heart skipped a beat. They had to move quickly. The escape route was clear, but they would have to fight their way out. Jason gave Zira a determined look. "Stay close. Can't get caught now." The Empire might have the power, but they had something the Empire didn't: hope, courage, and the will to fight. As they reached the door leading out of the base, the Empire's soldiers appeared, blocking their path. Zira and Jason stood side by side, ready for the fight. "Move," Jason shouted. The battle was fierce. Zira fought with everything she had, her body moving instinctively, every move calculated. She had never fought like this before. Her training had prepared her, but it was the fire inside her that drove her forward. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for the people who had been oppressed for too long. She was fighting for the future, for freedom. Zira's heart pounded in her chest as she fought off the Empire's soldiers. Every strike, every movement was precise. She could feel the power in her muscles, the strength in her resolve. This was what she had been born to do, not to serve, but to fight for what was right. Jason fought alongside her, his calm presence a steadying force. Together, they were unstoppable. The soldiers were no match for the rebellion's determination. Zira and Jason worked in perfect unison, taking down the guards one by one, till they were free to escape. But as they reached the final checkpoint, the doors slammed shut behind them. A new group of soldiers had arrived, and they were blocking the only way out. Zira's heart raced. This was the end of the line. "Jason," Zira shouted, fear creeping into her voice. "What do we do?" Jason's eyes met hers, and for a moment, everything seemed to slow down. But then he smiled, that same calm smile that had kept her going all this time. "We fight," he said simply. "We don't stop. Not now, not ever." Zira nodded, determination flooding her veins. They had come this far. There was no turning back now. With a fierce cry, Zira charged forward, taking on the soldiers with everything she had. Behind her, his movements as sharp as ever. Together, they broke through the blockade, and with one final push, they reached the exit. The air outside felt cool against Zira's skin as they ran, escaping the base just before the explosion tore. Through the Empire's communication center, the sound of the blast echoed through the night, signaling the end of the Empire's control over the communication network. They had done it. Zira took a deep breath, her body shaking with adrenaline and relief. They had struck a blow to the Empire. But the fight was far from over. There would be more battles, more struggles ahead. But for the first time, Zira didn't feel afraid. She felt alive. She had found her place, her purpose. The rebellion was no longer just a dream. It was a reality, and Zira was part of it. She wasn't just a servant anymore. She was a fighter. She would keep fighting until the Empire was no more.